The tennis world was already buzzing after Alex Eala's statement victory over Alycia Parks at the National Bank Open in Toronto, but what happened after the match may have made even more noise. Eala had just gotten payback for her Australian Open loss to Parks, delivering a confident performance in front of a sold-out crowd of roughly 12,500 fans, with a massive Filipino contingent turning the stadium into what felt like a home court. Then Novak Djokovic entered the conversation. The 24-time Grand Slam champion finally addressed the frenzy surrounding Eala, and instead of treating the packed crowds and scheduling headaches as a problem, Djokovic flipped the entire conversation on its head. He essentially called it a good problem to have. He recognized the extraordinary support Eala was receiving from Filipino fans, acknowledged just how significant her emergence had become for the Philippines, and made it clear that the tennis world was paying attention. And considering who those words came from, they carried serious weight. Before we get deeper into Djokovic's reaction, though, you have to understand exactly what Eala had just accomplished in Toronto. The 21-year-old Filipina arrived at the National Bank Open carrying major momentum from her historic run at the DC Open. By this point, she wasn't simply being talked about as an exciting young prospect anymore. Her list of notable victories already included Olympic gold medalist Ji Wenjing, defending champion Leylah Fernandez, world number 10 Elina Svitolina, four-time Grand Slam champion Naomi Osaka, and world number 3 Jessica Pegula. Those were not the results of someone who was merely having a lucky week. Eala was proving, match after match, that she could stand across the net from elite players and win. And in Toronto, there was another layer to the story. Waiting for her was Alycia Parks, the American who had beaten Eala at the Australian Open earlier in the year. This wasn't just another match on the schedule. It was a rematch, a chance to measure how far Eala had come, and an opportunity to erase a painful earlier result. From the opening exchanges, Eala looked ready for it. She attacked with confidence, moved aggressively, and showed the kind of composure that has quickly become one of her biggest strengths. Every big point sent another wave of noise through the stadium. Chants of Eala rolled through the stands. Filipino flags were everywhere, and the energy felt more like Manila than Toronto. Instead of being overwhelmed by it, Eala seemed to feed off the atmosphere. By the end of the match, she had avenged the Australian Open defeat and added another historic achievement to her growing resume by becoming the first Filipina to win a match at the National Bank Open. More importantly, the performance reinforced the idea that her DC Open breakthrough was not some one-time miracle. Her game was clearly evolving. Her serve was becoming more reliable, her movement sharper, and her decision-making under pressure more mature. The promising junior who once looked like a player for the future was rapidly becoming a legitimate WTA threat right now. But even that doesn't fully explain what has been happening around Alex Eala, because the story is bigger than what takes place between the lines. Tennis has started experiencing what fans are calling the Eala Effect. Wherever she plays, Filipino supporters show up, and Toronto provided perhaps the clearest example yet. Interest in her match became so intense that the original 2,800-seat grandstand simply wasn't enough to handle demand. Organizers moved her to a larger court, and the night session reportedly sold out within about 30 minutes. That kind of reaction is rare, especially so early in a tournament. Organizers even leaned into the moment by adding traditional Filipino dishes to the food offerings, another indication of just how visible the Filipino presence had become. Part of Eala's popularity comes from the enormous Filipino diaspora, but there's more to it than nationality alone. Fans have connected with the drama of her matches, the emotion of her victories, and the personality she shows in interviews. At a time when women's tennis continues searching for the next wave of globally recognizable stars following the retirement of legends such as Serena Williams, Eala has emerged as one of the most intriguing young faces on tour. And Novak Djokovic noticed. When Djokovic was asked about the crowded scenes surrounding Eala's matches and the difficulty tournaments can face when a rapidly rising player suddenly attracts more fans than expected, he didn't complain about the chaos. Instead, he pointed to Eala's situation as understandable. He noted that she comes from the Philippines, a large country where her success has become a major story, and recognized her as the most significant tennis player the country has produced. Coming from Djokovic, that perspective matters. This is a man who has won 24 Grand Slam singles titles, including 10 Australian Open championships. He has competed inside the biggest stadiums, played in front of hostile crowds, supportive crowds, and everything in between. Very little about tennis atmosphere surprises him anymore. Yet, he clearly understood why Eala was attracting unusual attention. Djokovic also acknowledged the scheduling challenge. Maybe, he suggested, you could argue she should have been placed on a bigger court from the beginning. But he also explained why tournament organizers can find themselves in difficult positions. Eala is still young and only recently breaking through at this level, while the early rounds of major events are filled with established stars competing for limited space on the biggest courts. Predicting exactly which match will suddenly become the hottest ticket in town isn't always easy. Then came the line that summed up his entire perspective. It's a good problem to have, because the alternative is much worse. Imagine having nobody interested, empty seats, and no atmosphere. In other words, packed stadiums aren't a crisis for tennis. They're evidence that people care. Djokovic's comments also reflected his own long experience with the sport's complicated scheduling and logistical debates. Throughout his career, he has seen controversies involving match times, court assignments, tournament decisions, coaches, officials, and enormous public attention. He understands that when major personalities attract passionate fan bases, tournaments sometimes have to adapt quickly. From his perspective, interest is ultimately healthier than indifference. What really stood out, though, was that Djokovic specifically recognized the attention surrounding Eala. That mattered because she isn't just another player getting a few loud cheers. She is carrying expectations from millions of Filipinos who have rarely had the opportunity to see one of their own competing at this level in global tennis. Djokovic's acknowledgement gave outside validation to something Filipino fans had already been feeling for months. This is becoming bigger than one breakthrough tournament. The Eala Effect has been building around the world. Wherever she appears, Filipino communities appear with her. And it isn't limited to fans flying in from Manila. It can be nurses living in London, engineers working in Berlin, students studying in Melbourne, or entire families based in Toronto. One Philippine flag appears in the crowd, then another, and before long chants in Tagalog begin echoing through the venue. That connection comes from Eala's story as much as her results. She grew up in a country without the deep professional tennis tradition of the United States, Spain, France, or Australia. At 13, she left her family to train at the Rafa Nadal Academy in Spain, making an enormous sacrifice at an age when most kids are still figuring out high school. Her early tennis story even included practicing on a makeshift court painted over a basketball court. From those beginnings to becoming a WTA champion, the journey has become deeply inspirational to Filipino fans. You could already see the effect at the Australian Open, where supporters waited for hours for a chance to watch her main draw debut. At Wimbledon, Filipino fans again filled sections of the stands and created an unmistakable atmosphere. Then came Toronto, where the level of support jumped another notch because thousands of Filipino Canadians finally had an opportunity to see her compete in person. Tournament officials noticed, too. Toronto tournament director Carl Hale said the phenomenon had become a topic of conversation throughout the industry, emphasizing how unusual it was to see a player outside the very top of the rankings generate this type of reaction. That helps explain why Djokovic's comments landed so strongly. When somebody with his experience notices what is happening, it becomes harder to dismiss Eala's rise as temporary hype. And the milestones keep piling up. Eala has already gone farther than any Filipino player before her. She became the first Filipino player to be seated at Wimbledon, the first to reach the second week of a Grand Slam, the first to capture a WTA Tour singles championship, and the first to break into the world's top 20. And she has done all of that while still only 21 years old. Recognition from Djokovic doesn't guarantee what comes next, of course, and Eala still has to win every match with her own racket. But attention from a legend of the sport can increase visibility, strengthen her global profile, and potentially make her even more attractive to sponsors, partners, tournaments, and international audiences. Being discussed by one of tennis's greatest champions adds another layer of credibility to a player whose resume is already beginning to speak loudly for itself. What makes Eala's response to all of this even more interesting is how determined she seems to remain grounded. Rather than talking about rankings she must reach or trophies she absolutely has to win, she has focused on the quality of her tennis. "I don't really like to put a cap on what I'm able to do," she explained, while emphasizing that her main goal is simply to keep playing good matches at a high level. That mindset tells you a lot. She understands how quickly expectations can grow, especially when an entire nation is emotionally invested in every result. But she also knows that getting consumed by the hype could become a distraction. Earlier in the tournament, she expressed that philosophy even more simply, saying she doesn't see herself differently and that she knows who she is. That humility has become one of the reasons fans have connected so strongly with her. Despite the rankings, historic wins, packed arenas, and global attention, she continues to speak about her roots and representing the Philippines with pride. That is why Toronto felt like more than a tennis tournament. The supporters filling the stadium weren't only there to see forehands and backhands. For many of them, watching Eala represented a shared cultural moment. It was a chance for Filipino families living thousands of miles from home to wave their flag on an international stage and celebrate somebody who represented them. And Eala understood exactly what they were giving her. She has talked about how difficult it is not to absorb their energy, and in Toronto, that energy followed her through every point. That brings us back to Djokovic's good problem comment, because at its core, this story isn't really about court assignments or ticket demand. It's about what can happen when one athlete gives an entire community a reason to care about a sport in a completely new way. Tennis has always been global, but stars can open doors into markets and cultures that previously existed on the edge of the sport. Alex Eala is doing that for the Philippines. She has gone from a young girl in Manila with enormous ambitions to a WTA champion drawing sold-out crowds thousands of miles from home. Djokovic recognized it. Tournament directors recognize it. Fans around the world recognize it. And now the question becomes just how far this can go. At 21, Eala has already rewritten Filipino tennis history several times, yet everything about her trajectory suggests the biggest chapters may still be ahead. The National Bank Open is another test, another opportunity, and another stage on which she can prove that she belongs against the best in the world. Whether she wins every match or faces setbacks along the way, the impact is already undeniable. The stands are full, the flags are waving, the chants are getting louder, and one of the greatest players in tennis history has essentially told everyone that this kind of excitement isn't a problem tennis should fear. It's exactly the kind of problem the sport should want. Alex Eala's next challenge is coming, and once again, the Philippines, and now much of the tennis world, will be watching.